Morning, fellow skeptics, here on a Saturday morning. As you can kind of tell, it's a little sunny out here in Oregon. I'm going to be as concise as I can. I'm going to follow up on my discussion about the principle of strong side forward as expressed and explained through JKD or Jeet Kune Do. I'm going to try to lay something to rest. There's been a lot of confusion, more likely unintended, but it just came out that way. What would appear as contradictory statements, particularly when it comes to this sediment, which is, if you say JKD is exclusively this, then or this or that, then you've missed the point and you're not JKD. Well, that's kind of true on one level, in that JKD doesn't have the monopoly on these principles. I think what Bruce had tried to do, and what makes it more difficult, is the literature having been publicly available through its publishing posthumously after his death in 73. The natural confusion lies in certain statements. And again, these statements and verbiages you'd find in that text, the Tao Jeet Kune Do mainly, because is these statements, these findings of his, were all collected by Bruce, but they were not compiled by him. They were compiled by his students, and they worked with what they could. So the notion of strong side forward, as I explained in my recent discussion with Netter and Troy on their channel, that there are inevitable happenings when it comes to certain principles, mainly the dogmatization or the attempts at dogmatization of such principles. So to follow up on my recent discussions about strong side forward, the reason why I brought that up is one of the pinnacle principles when thinking about, okay, what is unique, again, not exclusive, but unique to an art like JKD. And as I explained, the use of the lead side, most coordinated side, in my case left-handed, because that's where I do most of my stuff, standing with that forward, again with the presupposition of lead versus rear placements, and following that up with another principle, longest weapon, nearest target, which will help, or I'm trying to have it help, explain where the expressions will look different and will cause some scandal in the eyes and minds of some, maybe many, where the strongest side may not exactly be the most coordinated side inherently. Like, sometimes it may be the rear side, which is the strongest side, and you're pushing it forward. But that presumes you've worked through the art, and you've already got the basis and the foundation to start, which is, being used to getting that mentality ingrained of hitting 80% of the time with your lead hand and foot. And I think I talked about the hook kick briefly. But in Longstreet, going back to longest weapon to nearest target, he uses the side kick as his example, talking about, at least according to that snippet in Longstreet, where he had explained, the side kick to the knee, which is one of the many clips being often replayed by various content providers. So, longest weapon. But in the lineage I've been brought up in, predominantly Ted Wong, not to say that I wasn't brought up by others. I've been around the Tackett guys for a while before going to Ted Wong lineage. And it was nothing against Tim Tackett's guys. whenever I make a movement, I try to make it not so that I was running away from it, but more towards it. That might be a conversation within the religious sphere if I want to go that route. But it's very important that when I made the transition to Ted Wong, it wasn't anything. It wasn't anything or for anything that Tim Tactic guys had done, like at my expense or anything like that. No ill will, none of that at all. Um, but so anyway, at least in that lineage, you would spend a bulk of time with the lead straight punch, doing that business. And the second thing you would learn, or I would say, not say, so you would learn the stance, of course, you would learn the footwork. But then the first tool you'll learn would be the straight lead. Depending on the teacher and their planning, they would have you not only start with the lead punch, but they would have you start with the lead kick, which in my experience would be the hook kick. That's which is contrary to popular belief, which is a very linear stroke. You would think, well, what do you mean a hooking pattern? There is a bit of hooking and curvature to it, but depending on what school what school of thought you come from or what lineage you come from, it could either be like a tie round kick done with a lead leg, or it could be very snappy looking, what you might call a front kick. But in JKD we call it what would be termed a front kick, we call it a straight kick, based on if you were to look at the movement and compare it. So anyway, straight punch, lead straight punch, lead hook kick, that would be your 1-2. In contrast against common boxing methodologies, the 1-2 would be your lead and rear straights. Okay, so longest weapon and nearest target. All right. So how do I present a flexible way of looking at those? How do I reconcile those, especially if I'm going to train someone in this, and not to be so dogmatic about, it's got to be strong side forward, because it's easy to take it as it's got to be my left hand. In my case, it's got to be my left hand, got to be my left leg. But depending on where you are, and this is something Ted Wong himself said in a seminar, the distance, angle, and alignment dictate the tool. So what do you mean by that? At some point, you will have ingrained the longest weapon nearest target through the lead straight punch and lead hook kick. Of course, there are other lead hand, lead foot tools that you use. I already mentioned the straight kick, and then there's also the side kick. Okay, so I already mentioned in my conversation with Netter and Troy, there are five basic punches and 3 kicks. I already named them. The 3 kicks I've already named. I've only mentioned the lead. I think I've demonstrated a lead hook before, but just to run through them if you want to know. 5 punches. Well, what are they? Straight, corkscrew, shovel, back fist, and I think those are the others. So I already demonstrated a hook before. So lead straight, back fist, corkscrew, shovel, and back fist. Yeah, straight, back fist, corkscrew, shovel, and a hook. Those are the 5 punches. Okay. So what do you do with that? Okay. Now, say you move through that progression, and again, that's going to be based on what the instructor at the time. And I'll say that my upbringing in JKD was a little scattered, but it's always tricky when someone says, "Well, what experience do you have?" And depending on where I want to go with it, and I would say my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu development has gotten scattered. I did like a A to Z type of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu course back in college, my first quarter at Cal State LA. we ran through the ABCs. Cool. But ever since then, going to a class, it's like, here's this, here's that, here's this choke, that choke. And it's very tricky because it means, like, yeah, I'm not exactly a beginner, but I'm not quite intermediate even. So, that's been a trip in terms of my own development. Like, at least with JKD, I think I was at a point where, yeah, I may have had the experience, but then when I realized there was a distinctive trait to the Ted Wong lineage material, then I said, okay, I'm gonna go start from scratch within reason. I didn't go from bare beginner, but I made some alterations to the way I stood and so forth, and the way I thought about, the kicks I learned. Um, so there's a way. It took a little bit of that, but okay. Where was I going to go with this? So, say you go through that, and the instructor says, "Okay, you're ready to move on," or at least you will have done the homework, because every instructor will be different. Every situation you learn, or where you go to learn an art, it'll be different. I learned the material I got for JKD. I mostly got it from a weekly class held within the walls of a recreation center, Alpine, out there in LA. For those you know about LA Chinatown, cool. If you know, you know. LA Chinatown over in Yale Street, good old days. So I had a weekend. I just had one day, 2 hours, and the rest was doing the homework, because his goal was head knowledge, and I think I've already mentioned that on the discussion with Netter and Troy. So say you go through that whole development, or we introduce rear hand tools. This is where people get, huh? What about frontside forward? And as I already mentioned, Ted Wong himself said, distance, angle, and alignment. And I did mention hip and shoulder alignment, but I'm going to try to keep it to a minimum about principles. Okay? Longest weapon. If my distance, if I'm too close, and going back to that description about striking versus grappling, striking prefers distance, grappling prefers to close it. Okay? It's one of those simple, basic truths that I've come across in the exposure I've had to martial arts. I've got to be able to control you. I have to be close enough to get control, to hold you, to do whatever. Striking, I need to be far enough so you don't hit me, but my limb can fully extend. Okay? So going back to that whole longest weapon, nearest target, that's probably more of a striking thing. I mean, there's a bit of distance in grappling, but it's not going to be treated the same way. You create distance so you can reclose it. I think that would be the closest thing. That you want to create the space so you can regain control of the space, so that you can close it. But either way, if my angle, my alignment, if they dictate that I throw a rear-handed tool, okay, I will do that. Or even if I am in a situation where I have to, because of distance and alignment, I've switched leads. Taekwondo has a interesting methodology. Like they switch stances. So in essence, they switch leads. And the way they do it, basically you're just having a different side presented to a dueling opponent. But in JKD, depending on the recovery, so this is where we think about, okay, if I'm in a recovery and I'm recovering from either a miss or something, and I've thrown a strike and my recovery dictates I'm in a different lead than what I started with, okay, work with it. So whether that's me throwing here, using my rear side, that becomes a longest weapon. That becomes my strongest side. Okay. Likewise, if my lead is changed and I'm facing instead with like this, again, if the recovery dictates, you don't go in there deliberately switching your stance. Again, the alignment, the movement, the opponent movement, and your relationship, they have to dictate that. They should dictate that, dare I say, organically. Okay? If I do this, I'm like this, okay. Well, my strong side is back. Oh, the horror! But I'm moving forward with my strongest side. Because again, if the distance and the angle dictate and my alignment dictate that I start putting my strongest hand. Okay. And then I'm still hitting about 80% of the time, because in a perfect world, or I should say not in a perfect world, but to again keep up with certain strategic ideals in mind, if this is going to be my strongest from this vantage point, if my right side is forward presented, okay, somehow if it's presented that way, I've got to use now my strong side, which is now back. But I'm still going to end up hitting about 80% of the time, because that is still the strongest. That is still the strongest weapon or strongest side that I'm going to be hitting 80% of the time still. Well, okay, I may do this, in order to create an advantage. So with my paradigm shift, of course, I have a different end game in mind. I'll use this if I gotta, so I can regain control. So I know that seems like a lot for many, this idea of how do I reconcile this idea, how the expressions of various principles. Am I really violating strong side forward if my thing dictates that this is the longest weapon to my nearest target? Again, just the idea that for a strike, I need to have something where the extension is such I have enough penetration, but then I can have enough to whip it back, if that makes sense. So just to kind of continue the discussion on a principle, just something as simple as strong side forward, where, as Ted Wong said, simple isn't easy. Or I think even those, I think I heard that from my first private instructor. His name is Sean. I'll just leave it at that. Sean. I don't know if he's still a cop, but I think I mentioned that I worked out with him. And so, hope that makes sense. And of course, as always, leave a comment whether you have a question, if there's something else you want me to cover, or something in addition to JKD. Though I know it's not my emphasis, I still remember a lot of it. Doesn't mean I could still pull it off. I could demonstrate it, but I'm sure I'll be rusty when it comes to a striking context because of what I've mentally decided to prepare for. A lot of what I do is more along the lines, and I think I mentioned in my other training videos, where a lot of what I'm doing now is just feeding towards a specific end state, a specific end in mind. So a lot of these things, my number one goal is control. So if I need to regain the control by striking or remove someone's control over me through striking, I'll use it. Or if someone's trying to overwhelm me with strikes, I gotta gain control by, reducing his effectiveness of striking in any way. Whether that's he's already landing blows on me or she's already landing blows on me, I gotta break the cycle. I gotta either use good defense or good cover, whatever. But at the same time, I can't stay there. I can't be bound by that. I gotta be able to break the cycle. Anyway, without going any further, hope that makes sense. Again, comment if you have a question about what I've just covered, or if there's anything else you need me to cover. More than happy to. I'll do my best. So, hope you all have a good rest of the day. I don't know if YouTube would be finished processing by the end of the morning. It's roughly 10:20 as of this recording. So, all right. Until next video, fellow skeptics, peace out, and I'll catch you all on the other side.